Welcome back to the Weaving Magic podcast. I am your host, Tara Webb.
And I'm your host, Alyssa Lilly.
And this episode, I feel like, has been a long time coming. I feel like
we've talked about it for a while.
We have. In the sense of like our own past lives, timelines, and that kind of thing.
Seder magic, yeah.
So specifically with past lives, it's kind of the belief that multiple timelines exist, right? That one that we can transcend and what's that word? When you die, you reincarnate.
Reincarnation, yeah.
So it's kind of like that belief. There's also the belief of like, you're basically living your past, present, and future at the same time. Too. There's like a lot of different ways to go through that. And I remember when I was a kid, I was in elementary school and we had just moved to a new place and we were taking a field trip to some old house in the area where I was. And I don't even remember what this house was about. And the little girl beside me, I don't even remember her name. I briefly just kind of remember just like an image of her. While we were there, we started pretending as if we were like sisters or had known each other and like this was our house. And it was very much of just like, yeah, you remember we did this? And like, so almost like you're playing with like an imaginary friend or, when you're friends, if you did this when you were little and you like created things and like y'all imagined, that's kind of what it felt like. What's interesting is in my adult mind now, I don't know this person. I look back and I don't remember having very much other contact with this person. I feel like I also, I think kids kind of made fun of us or like didn't believe us, obviously, as we're like saying these things. And I wonder if maybe I was actually tapping into something that I didn't understand. Not to say this person isn't real. Maybe they actually weren't. Maybe it was an imaginary friend. Maybe I don't.
It was real to you.
It was. And so it's kind of, got me thinking for many years, especially as I've shifted into the more spiritual realm of, past lives and that kind of thing, what actually was going on then and what I was feeling if I was tapping into ghost energy or ghost spirits, like, whatever you want to talk about within that of how that actually is. And just the fact that we're very much drawn to certain timelines, certain events within the quote unquote past. And I say it like that because obviously the past is still existing in some ways. We're drawn to those places because, or so it's said, because our soul resonates with that because we came from there / we still live there. I feel like all this language is very vague.
It is. But as is past life magic, just generally, it's vague and vivid at the same time. It's like a fleeting memory that you tap into, and it takes a lot of practice. I feel like it's a muscle you have to flex. Because for me, when we've tapped into past lives, I feel like we get into it and it's like, I can see it and I can feel it and then it's gone.
Yeah, that's very true. And I don't know if I've shared how I began tapping into that on here before.
I don't think so.
Okay, so...
Do I know how you did this? I don't even know if I know this.
I think you do because you're part of the reason or the connection.
Catalyst.
Yeah, to be able to get me there, right? So when I was going through witch school, Mia Magick was leading us through this really cool meditation. And I was trying to go back and describe this meditation to Alyssa at one point. And I don't even know what happened, but through describing this and having just some kind of conversation with Alyssa, I was like propelled into a story about the past that I, at the time, was like, I feel like this is us, almost like our soul connection. And, like my body and mind, in a sense, were literally transported into who I was in the past. And I was also very unsure, being the first time I'd ever done this. And two, I wasn't entirely sure of my connection with Alyssa. Like, I knew Alyssa was a safe person in that sense, but like, hey, I feel like we have a soul connection and we're from the past. And I'm like, we used to
Let's be best friends.
Like, how do you have that conversation? I don't know. So
we
like,
did it though.
We did it. And I mentioned it. And of course, Alyssa was very much of, yeah, that sounds about right, And so from there, for the next few weeks, basically, anytime I thought of somebody, I was propelled into a backstory, essentially, a past life of them. And I had to learn how to not, because it was so draining. I would just essentially just be propelled, like sucked in, and then come back out. Like,
existing in the timelines like that, I can't imagine that not being draining,
Yeah.
Just like, it's a trip.
And then after that, for a while, I learned how to save my energy by casting a circle around myself and like that kind of thing, and like really preserving it. Now I don't have to do that because I have the ability to know when to kind of like turn it off and like what the energy means and like that kind of thing. But that's how it originally started for me. And I didn't know what was happening. So a lot of times when we do these like Akashic record things, and for those who aren't sure about the Akashic records, that's something where it's said it's basically like everything that's ever happened and will happen and is happening in the universe, that someone can tap into that and like not see as if like, I see exactly, but like has an idea, right? You could like go into any area basically and kind of understand. And there's things
I just picture it as like this huge library that's just right above the surface that you can just reach out.
Mm-hmm. I feel like it's like an energy wave, like I can't think of the word, but yeah, it's like you're like stuck in and you come back out, like you're unplugging and plugging in to each area. And they say like you can wipe your Akashic record and like that kind of stuff. So I know when we're like going through that on YouTube or just going through with somebody else, it's difficult to know what's real and what's not. And by real, I mean like, is that true? I don't know. It feels true, but also who am I to say that I was Queen Sheba, right? Like that kind of thing, especially when it is a really big name, right? Who am I to say I was Jane Austen? Like those kinds of feelings. And what we have to realize is, I feel like, and this sounds weird, we are multiple people at once in some ways, especially those big energies. So, if you say like Jesus and Buddha, to me, it wasn't necessarily just one person. It was a collective mind. It was a collective of people, right? The energy around it, or maybe even, who's the big well-known person from Egypt, the queen?
You know what? It's funny because she came up for me and I cannot think. Been sitting here trying to think of her name.
It wasn't Sheba. That's the first person that came to mind.
No, it was, Isis keeps coming to my head. That's not it either. It's, oh my gosh, that's going to drive me nuts. Not Calypso.
That'll come as you're thinking. But it's like saying, I'm this person, and it's almost like there can be multiples of people who have been that person.
Cleopatra.
There we go. I feel like there are multiples of people who've been that person just because, well, the timelines are still existing and there are multiple timelines within it. And I also think like, you can change your past to change your future kind of thing, because that shifts time.
Let's dive into that a little bit. So you think that by tapping into Akashic records and tapping into that past version of yourself and that energy that you are part of, because you said collective energy, you can change your future, change timelines?
Yes, like if we think about our choices and how they direct us anyways, I'm choosing to now act this way towards my kids versus this way, as just an example, right? You're going to shift that. And I know we get in the battle of like, well, technically in history and in our space, we knew that that's
I mean, look at the Mandela effects. Like,
yeah, that's a big one.
What is history? We don't even know anymore.
But like, it's essentially saying that that's already defined, like that's written out. And so of course, When you say, like, you know, God already knows what you're going to do, fate, like that kind of stuff, it's already written out. So like, you're just kind of following that path. You were supposed to do that anyways. I sometimes like to think of it being like, this drives me into another path, into another timeline. If I continue down that one, then I would continue meeting up against those same resistances, those same things that are constantly causing the issues. So when you think of like healing, if I'm responding to this trigger in a different way, I've become a different person because I can no longer be that person because I'm responding differently now.
That's deep, because I even think of like when you're when we talk about saying affirmations and literally rewiring your brain, you were literally creating a new reality for yourself, truly.
And so like then it like jumps into that question of, is that other me still in that reality, or is it like another person? Like that's those kinds of thoughts. But going back to healing from the past, if you know past lives, because our soul tends to, at least in my opinion, tends to choose things that we are going to go through until we kind of figure it out, right? Like we're going to go through the same situations or something similar. And we might have learned the lesson then, but we didn't carry it over into this life kind of thing. Then looking back at that and say like, hey, look, I see this person navigating it this way. Okay, what was my lesson there? And how can I bring that forward to this situation? Because like you're repeating the patterns. So by looking at that, you can then shift how that person sees it back then, how I see it now, and you're both propelled into a new way of thinking, a new way of like changing and looking at stuff, like breaking the boundary around staying in that one spot.
I almost feel like when we, reincarnation, when we come back, I almost feel like we choose things if we didn't learn the lesson. Like, I want to learn this lesson, we're going to do it again.
Yeah.
We're going to try again. Because I feel like when we've tapped into our past lives, there have been instances where we've noticed that we were going through something that feels more than just what's happening in this moment. It feels like this has happened before, almost deja vu, but obviously like a different lifetime. Yeah. And so it's almost as if our soul is craving that involvement.
Mm-hmm. And I think our souls do crave involvement in general, crave the change and being able to move forward. And that's why we get so frustrated when it feels like we can't solve something. We feels like we can't take that step forward, because we feel stuck, and we feel it not just stuck in this life. We feel it stuck in our
on such a soul level.
It just feels like it's a thing that's held us back multiple times almost.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I do past life readings, mine are I feel like different, and maybe that's just because of I've actually never done them with somebody else, in the sense of someone doing a past life reading for me. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's not super different, but I feel like
it's hard because I don't think a lot of people do them.
Yeah. Because I feel like I see it one way of like, it could actually be who you were back then, or it's a story that helps me understand what you're going through, even if you weren't exactly doing like that person that I see. Right.
Well, I mean, that makes me think of like, and this might be a little bit of a tangent, but when we think about religion, right? When we open our minds and start to learn the different stories, that's what it is. We're learning the stories of these people's lives, or this God story, right? And we are using that to help us navigate and get through the emotions and barriers and stories that are holding us back, right? Mm-hmm. So even if in some way this isn't true, right? There is no such thing as past lives. This is getting weird. If there's no such thing as past lives.
The slime is getting weird for those who cannot see.
Oh yeah. My slime is more sticky than it should be.
Not the topic. Well, yeah. It is.
But there is still, it's just like oracle cards, right? You're pulling cards to help you think outside of the box and to really work through what's going on, get to the root of it, versus staying surface level and having it repeat over and over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think in some ways you can also just tap into your own past life, even just with the knowledge of like you were you're in the moment about to do the exact same thing and you catch yourself, right? Like,
that happens to me all the time.
Yeah, and I feel like that is, in a sense, tapping into the story of your past life, even if you're not like, oh, I was this person doing this, right? Like that kind of thing. You're just literally at that moment going, I have acted this way in the past, whether souls past or now, and I'm choosing to do this. You are tapping into something in that sense. But let's also talk about, we're going to go back to the areas of like the way that we navigate and like we feel connected to certain places, right?
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Because that like the little house that I'm actually wanting to go research now, because I've actually never really looked into it. I kind of like left it alone, but where I felt like a kid of like, oh, I'm a ghost here. And like, I used to live here, like that kind of thing. Side note, I don't even know how a kid could even like think of that without knowledge. Anyways,
kids will say crazy things, like especially when they're closer to their birth time. I feel like that memory is more prominent for them.
Definitely. So I know for me, I've always felt drawn to Egypt. I think a majority of us have. I feel like it's a huge one because, and in my opinion, there are at least two. I know more, right? But there are two really big booms in civilization around Egypt, which we truly don't know very much about. And a lot of things that were built and created back then are still marvels of how it could be done. I believe aliens, quote unquote, / technology that we truly had back then that we have, that was erased, that chose to be erased because mankind can't handle it. Honestly, humankind can't handle, like, yeah, maybe that is a mankind thing. Anyways, which is similar to Atlantis / Lemuria. And Lemuria, I say because not many know about Lemuria. We mostly hear Atlantis.
I had never heard of it until we got into like the spiritual realm and people started talking about it. But for me, I always thought, and again, this is coming from someone that has not done a lot of research into Lemuria, but in my brain, I always thought that Atlantis and Lemuria were the same things, but just different evolutions. Like, I think Lemuria probably came first and then Atlantis, and Atlantis is most known because that's what's most remembered.
Well, and from what I understand, there's a really awesome book, if I can find it really briefly.
Not most known, most recent. So that's why people remember and recollect.
Well, and it's not right here, so I can't pull it up. From what I understand, they kind of coexisted at the same time.
Okay.
And Lemuria, I think Atlantis was more of like the techie version, and Lemuria was more of, and by techie, I mean like using our brains, our minds to create tech and like that kind of thing. And I think Atlantis started to go down the path of control and, wanting a certain way with Lemuria. Lemuria is like, this is not, I don't know if there was a war that happened, but I know from what I understand, Lemuria sank / was destroyed first. And Atlantis did prevail, but I don't think for very long.
Well, Atlantis, that's because Atlantis valued the technology, right? So yes. They had the technology to sustain.
But it was upon essentially starting war or creating calamity between the two, it disrupted the balance, I think. And so around there, they could only sustain for so long. And as I'm working on my book / working, not really working, kind of working on this new series of mermaids, it's interesting seeing Atlantis and like in the Atlantic Ocean and where that actually would have been over there near Europe area, which I didn't realize. I kind of knew, but like not really. And I don't remember where Lemuria actually was supposed to be.
I'll look it up while you talk.
And I kind of actually wonder if the Bermuda Triangle is near Atlantis.
Ooh.
That's like a thought as well. I feel like I've looked this up for my book, but not like enough to, remember. So yeah, those are huge booms in society where a lot of us are like, yeah, I really resonate with that. Yeah, I really love Egypt. Like, I love the idea of scarab beetles, especially after watching The Mummy. Like, really, really gruesome, but it also fascinated me. And I would have nightmares, I will admit, had nightmares about scarabs crawling up my arm like that. But it was super fascinating because I remember studying it in school and just being like, yes, I want to know all about this. This is so interesting. From what I understand, that's because your soul is well connected to that. I would say also, Native American. And I feel like a lot of us probably feel connected to the Native American indigenous cultures without realizing, because my knowledge was so limited of like, it's only the American Indians, right? The Native Americans, and not realizing indigenous was basically every continent. So in that sense, a lot of us have come from an indigenous soul path.
Somewhere.
Which then gets
on the
difficult.
line, yeah. Because indigenous is native to that land.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And right before Alyssa says this, it also gets difficult because I feel like if you ever say, well, I feel like I was connected to Native Americans or to African Americans through this, like I had a past life there. I also have to be careful because it's like, especially for those that may not believe that, it's not like you get to claim it, per se, in this life, knowledge and ability to practice certain things and like that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So it's a weird, it's like I feel connected, but also that's not where I am in this life.
We also get to still be respectful. Yes. And let's be real here. The BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, the BIPOC is the global majority. And the reality of it is we all have come from some sort of line of BIPOC culture. We just,
even if descendant wise, like if you don't believe in past lives, our descendants started somewhere like years and years and years and years and years ago, millions of years, whatever, ago into that little, we came from that little section. Like we all have that. Once again, we can't claim like, well, I am like African American
and I can do closed practices. No.
But I think it does bring the ability to have awareness and respect, which is a huge thing. Go ahead, Alyssa. Where's Atlantis?
Wait, I thought you asked me where Lemuria was.
Yeah, that.
Oh, I was like, was I supposed to look up where Atlantis is?
No, I don't think so.
So the hypothesis was proposed as an explanation for the presence of Lemurian fossils in Madagascar and India. So somewhere around there, but they were not found in Africa or the Middle East. So that's kind of like the general area somewhere near Madagascar and India, which makes sense because that's India and Madagascar have such a deep spiritual way of living, truly.
So go ahead.
No, that's it. I was going to look up where Atlantis is now.
I have it right here, and it is kind of what I thought. So I'm going to show this picture because over here is the United States in South America, and over here is Africa. Whoops, you can't see me. Africa, and up here's Europe, and in between, obviously, the Atlantic Ocean, and there's Atlantis right in the middle. The Bermuda Triangle is like right here somewhere.
You know what'd be crazy?
What? I was going to guess.
It would be wild if the reality is that Atlantis still exists and the Bermuda Triangle and the way things get lost is a way the technology protects their existence.
Yeah. And I was actually thinking that partially. It's just very interesting. And I mean, if we want to look into any of the beliefs, so there was a belief years and years ago, whenever I was a Christian, that was said, by saying there's perfection, we admit there's imperfection, etc., and we have to have had example for perfection, i.e. God. Okay, that was the argument for believing in God. Perfection exists out there, and that's how we know that we can't attain to it, basically. If we want to follow that realm of thought, where would the title Atlantic Ocean come from? Well, there's Atlantis. Obviously, Atlantis could have been something else. Like the name was probably in a different way. Atlantic Ocean. I'm looking at what the meaning of the name is.
Yeah, I'm curious on the it's etymology, right? That's the word.
Yes, but not. This is just more of like where the name came from versus. Ancient Greece, Atlas.
Which is
whose punishment for fighting with the Olympic gods was carrying the sky on his shoulders for eternity. The place where he was said to perform his duties was the Sea of Atlas. The general idea Atlas extends to the mountains of Morocco and all that kind of stuff. So Atlas, Atlantis, I wonder, that's kind of like a rabbit hole to go down.
It is.
Yeah. So basically in that area, and this kind of follows in line with what we spoke about in the past episode of civilizations having these huge booms and then just falling off the map in a sense, or like all of this massive knowledge being quote unquote lost, destroyed, because maybe they were doing something they shouldn't have been doing. I mean, even just looking at the idea in the Bible of Sodom and Gomorrah, and like that idea of like being destroyed because they were doing things they should not have done per se. I do think that, and that idea has happened multiple times. Maybe not that like God destroyed it, but something happened within the balance for things to just collapse when society continues down a path. It can't maintain anymore, things get destroyed. And that also gets into the topic of timelines of like now, because, when COVID
I feel like we're on
happening,
the precipice of that.
Yeah, like
that
when
fall.
COVID was happening at the very big, not beginning of COVID, it was definitely like the summer of COVID. And in the spiritual community, there was a lot of talk of like, we need to keep this positive momentum because we're going to shift into this negative timeline that we can't get out of. And we have this positive, this higher timeline, right? And it's
or this, you need to get into the 5D
Yes.
/ Christianity, only a certain amount of us can be
Yes.
saved mentality.
And that's, I think, kind of where the timeline / past life things go almost like I would say a cult, honestly, of you have to believe it a certain way. I mean, it's so interesting because Alyssa and I talked about this in 2020 when people were saying, we have to shift into the 5D. Essentially, those who are not doing that will be left behind. And I remember thinking so much how this sounded like the rapture, right? And just the fear around it. And I was like, this makes no sense.
But also, like, what is this mentality that seems to be so repetitive throughout history that everybody has to be a specific way?
Yeah.
Like, why can't people just exist and be human and build their relationship with the universe in a way that works for them? Because I mean, it's just like the way we're affectionate with each other. Every relationship you have with a person, friendship, intimate, whatever, it's going to be different. If you've had different partners, each of those relationships are going to be different. And so the relationship you build with the universe, religion, whatever, it's going to look different. And I don't know why that scares people so much.
There's an interesting conversation that I was around a few days ago. While we were sitting outside with, one was a Christian, one, me, one was me,
Pagan.
and the other one was someone who was actually agnostic. Okay.
Oh, fascinating. Okay. I'm intrigued.
Yeah. And so like the person who I constantly mention here, who's Christian, is just loves these conversations. Like she even loves the topic when somebody brought up, who is pagan, how Satan could have actually been the good and God was evil. And she loves hearing about these thoughts because in her mind, and here's how she says it, if my God is who I say my God is, it's not going to shake my belief. It just helps me dive deeper because I'm not going to have every answer, And truly, this is to me the definition of a Christian, because she's so welcoming, inviting, and goes to those talks. And then she can walk away from it. Like there's not any combative arguing, which is what a lot of times it is nowadays, right? Of like, I'm right, I have to be right. This conversation was not that. It was like, tell me more. And so basically what he was saying with agnostic, and there's multiple beliefs of like what exactly agnostic is. Like you can follow, like with pagan, like there's multiple.
Because agnostic is the belief that something exists.
Yes.
Okay.
Whereas atheist is the belief of nothing, like no God, like that kind of thing. And so the way he said it, and I love how he said it, it's that it's kind of like the good works idea is within Christianity, but not. It's like the being up there knows that what I'm doing is for good. And I'm just going to trust that whatever being that is
knows my intention. Yeah.
knows my intentions behind what I'm doing, and I'm good. Which is kind of like the good works, but also not, because it's intention versus I'm just doing good things. I'm just performing actions. And I really like how he said that, because in a sense, I could kind of see myself falling into that too. And I don't know if it's something I've talked about on the podcast, but I do talk about this a lot, of going into the Chronicles of Narnia and diving into like the very last book. I just love the Chronicles of Narnia in general. But the very last book, when they're fighting, the two sides, Aslan and Zar, or whatever the quote unquote bad name, evil name is. And Aslan's army wins, and he opens the gates, and like people are going in, and there's a soldier that's for the other side. And he looks at him and he's like, "Are you going in?" And he's like, "Why would I go in? I fought for him. Like, I didn't worship you. I didn't honor you." And he's like, "No, everything good that you did could not have been done for him, because he is not good. That God, that image, that being is not good. So whatever you were doing, you basically did for me without realizing." It's the idea of like, your intention matters, not to whatever God is up there, to whatever being, alien lizard is up there. Like it sees it. And, no one is good and bad. Hold on. Good or bad. Like, we are both pieces, right? Mm-hmm. That ties into past lives.
Yeah.
Just because as you're going through it, it's still, people feel like it has to be one way still. Like, even just saying like the Akashic records, that's still just a belief of like, it's this, and you can only access it through this. And we've talked about this before.
There's so many different, like we talked about, like there's Seder magic, and there's different ways that different cultures access similar things that we call past lives or Akashic records. Again, everybody's relationship with that magic is going to be different.
As well as like, the spirits that you connect with, your ancestors and spirits and like that kind of things too. I know a lot of indigenous cultures have beliefs of the past lives, and like, I don't know what they would call it, but knowing that like they go into animals, and, this is my soul connection in a sense. Mm-hmm. So, for Alyssa and I, it's definitely been, this kind of also gets into the idea of twin flames, because we have been through multiple past life soul connections, together. And I feel like the term twin flame popped up like in 2020, 21. It was like, oh, I have a twin flame. Like, right. Like, I felt like it was like the new thing.
But it's also controversial too, because some people say twin flames are bad for each other, and other people think they are supposed to be lovers, like soulmates. They get those confused a lot.
And I think it's supposed to be someone who challenges you. And if that is a lover, that can be difficult if you're both healing. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes you don't want to hear that from someone, right? You don't want to basically have someone constantly challenge what you're doing. For Alyssa and I, it's very safe because we have the ability to like not walk away.
Tara calls me out on my shit all the time.
But there's a safety there. If Justin were my twin flame, I don't know how that would have went like in our early days, honestly, because we were already pushing each other with boundaries. It might have actually pushed us apart, because both of us feeling so right, maybe in a sense, and not being able to hear the criticism. And
also, and I can speak to this, we had just talked about this recently, of like, there's a person that I dated back in high school when I was deep in my wounds. And we were toxic to each other. Toxic. And I think with this person, I think that there was definitely past life. I think that it could have been something beautiful. I don't think it was meant to be a relationship, like an intimate relationship. I think we were friends at some point in our past lives. But because we came into each other's lives, and every time we crossed paths, because we've crossed paths several times in this lifetime, it has been in a moment where we're both in our wounded and attacking each other or reacting versus seeing each other and where we were at in our healing journey. And so I feel like with twin flames, if you come across each other's paths, it can be something toxic if you're not in the right space. And I feel like when we've gone, even in our past lives together, there have been times where we've missed each other. And I think that's intentional, where we can maintain the relationship that we have now in this lifetime.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, the past life that I saw with Alyssa was during the witch trials. And it was very interesting because Alyssa was one of the ones being burned and I wasn't. And so guilt, interestingly enough, of that, right? Of like having a connection and stuff like that. And because I've always, once again, felt drawn to the Salem witch trials. That was always something that was very fascinating and very interesting to me. And then going back further of Alyssa being there to kind of save me in some situations, but like not as a human, as an animal form. And so things like that. So the idea also of the twin flame is that you essentially are the same soul. And see, I also find that very difficult too, because while Alyssa and I do share a soul connection,
very different.
And by that I say of like, hey, I call this up, hey, I'm feeling this too. Like pretty much on cue with each thing that we're both feeling, I do feel like we're different souls, obviously, in some ways, which then makes me wonder, are there multiple souls in us? And also could get on the topic of transgender. But you know what I'm saying, of like how you can associate like the feelings of, you know, maybe some have two souls that are like one's more masculine, one's way more feminine, and it's like that battle. Or maybe aren't both of the souls in mine all feel more feminine. I don't know, right? It's just a thought. But when I went back to like my beginning, was that we were a star and it like broke apart. And so the belief is energy doesn't dissipate. It has to go somewhere. You know, energy doesn't just appear and disappear. So if a star combusts, if a star breaks apart, where does that energy go? It has to go somewhere. And that's also throughout, you know, the death of a plant. That's energy. Where does that energy then go? There's multiple places, right? In that sense.
Well, there's
so
also... Oh, go ahead.
I'll say we don't have answers to any of it.
No, we don't. This is more of just kind of talking through our experience and what we're feeling. But there's also beliefs. I can't remember the book that I read, but I remember my English teacher introduced me to it. And it was a fascinating belief that everyone was one consciousness. So basically, and I believe it was referencing God in particular, that we were all God, but we were all pieces. Like God had split himself up, themselves up into all of these different people. And our goal through life was to come to that realization that we are God. So I always thought that was that was a fascinating way to look at it, that we are all one soul, one consciousness. And we need to reconnect with that fact that we are all one.
Well, and I think we've also thought of, it's like the Norse gods or any other gods per se, how they were very much worshipped at a certain time, like now they're gone / coming back, right? To be able to have that, it has to be multiple consciousnesses. Consciousnesses. That's a weird word.
It is a weird word.
To be able to maintain that, because I felt like at one point I have felt connected to the goddess Freya as if I were Freya, which in that sense, there are multiple souls out there creating this connection and being for that God to be able to exist, right?
But also, is it that, or is it that we are dividing what we think soul should be? So it's kind of like how we split up masculine and feminine energy, for example, right? We split it up. You need to balance your masculine, you need to balance your feminine. But why is it so binary? It really should just be one cohesive unit versus like one or the other. So is it that there are multiple consciousnesses.
Right. That's a weird word.
Multiple conscious, or is it one consciousness that we're trying to wrap our brain around, and we're categorizing it? You know what I mean?
And that's like the same idea I was thinking of with Jesus and Buddha and like that kind of thing of just, it's a movement / it's just so many people believing in one thing at one time and fighting for it in some ways too.
Mm-hmm. And it's wild to me to think about Jesus' story in particular, especially with the current climate of events right now. So I feel like if he were here, he would probably be one of the most hated people.
Yeah.
And it's just wild to me because a lot of the things, at least in the States, that are being passed and things like that, and a lot of the legislation and things like that are all things that are completely the opposite of what their belief comes from.
I also think in general, a lot of times whenever we hype up a person, a being, and for example, we can also think of Martin Luther King.
Oh yeah.
And, they're highlighted in this one way. Truly, the reason they are so well known is because they were a catalyst. And people who are catalysts typically aren't honored and recognized and loved at that time in their life. And so we're honoring them now, which is beautiful, but also things shift and society likes to highlight the things that make it what they want it to be, right? Martin Luther King talked to this and this and this, and he was all about like peace and all that kind of stuff. Well, yes, but also he was saying, we have to do something to get heard, and sometimes these actions may not be what society wants you to do. That's just that way through multiple figures in history of they're highlighted in one way, history being his story, and the way that the historians have crafted that via how they actually were. And like, for example, I want to go back and reread the Odyssey, and it's been translated. I think we've mentioned this before. It's been translated by a female. It's someone who realized all the misogynistic ways that Homer and whoever translated it from Greek put in there, and how it's actually not exactly that. It's like reading the Bible and seeing, oh, wait a minute, this was changed to make the wording at that time sound more like this.
Or to fit this agenda.
Yes, exactly. And so I feel like, reading the Odyssey in this more a female version / true, it just is so more interesting to me. So for this challenge for this week,
it's a tough one.
I would say, what is the one time in history that you have just always felt drawn to?
Or place.
Or place, and go dive into that and just play with that, right? Go and imagine yourself living in that time. Go be a little kid like you used to and play like that was happening. Because I feel like that helps us remember our own magic. And stay tuned, because we have a few more months. I can't think of how long until the baby's due, but after the baby is born and there's a few months of healing and that kind of thing, Alyssa and I will be offering some things around past lives and Reiki and that kind of stuff.
It'll be so good.
It will. And it's where we guide you through your past life, help you access how you can navigate it yourself, while also doing Reiki to heal your past life, your present life, and your future, and that kind of thing. It's something that's been in the works that we've played around with for quite a while. And it definitely is coming after the baby, because, things
That's
are
a lot.
crazy.
You need to focus on you and tiny human.
And I will say this before we hop off of being pregnant is very much a channel. And so it's like you're holding space for multiple beings to kind of enter your life as they try to decide if they're going to be that baby. Right. That kind of thing. And so in this way, I don't access past lives right now because it feels too opening, too
there's too much.
For me. Yeah, it just feels like I'm allowing too much in. And that could be true, could not be true, but that's my feelings. And so stay tuned basically for coming like around August, September timeframe for some wonderfully fun offerings from Alyssa and I. And we look forward to seeing you on our next episode.